Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Before we get started, please share the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. Share an episode about regenerative farming like today's episode. Share an episode about coffee and health. Change someone's opinion about coffee. Spreading the show helps us grow. Make sure you're subscribed. Give us a good rating and review. I appreciate you guys out there. I really do. Today, we are back to our Understanding Organic series. We're wrapping this series up, I feel. We've covered so many different topics, but one topic that we have not dove into yet has been composting and compost teas, and it's such a huge part of regenerative agriculture. We have to study it. We have to dive in deep. And as always, today we have Marybeth Sanchez as the guest. Thank you for joining me, Marybeth. How are you today?
Very good. It's a pleasure to be here. As always, you always make it fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Marybeth.
Thank you, Jordan.
You make it fun. And I assume today is going to be especially, I don't want to say easy, but especially enjoyable because composting, compost teas, beneficial biology, these are some of your favorite subjects, right?
This is my personal obsession. Yes, indeed. I do love the subject. In fact, just this morning I watched again the fantastic fungi movie that they recently released. That's
right.
Quite, oh my God, the eye candy. I mean, just for nothing but the eye candy, you just got to watch that because it is so, the photography is so, there's got so much time-lapse photography of the mushroom, the mycelium, and every part. And God, I mean, just really, it takes your brain and goes, whoa,
that's so
and
cool.
Into all kinds of places, which, as you probably know, fungi is one of the most important components in the whole compost system that you really want to have in your soil to get everything healthy and happy in there.
Yeah, no kidding. It's actually a matter of life and death to a lot of these farmers who undergo a drought, for instance. I was on the regenerative organic coffee farms, and their plants weren't dying like the synthetic farms because of their fungal life, their microbial life, their soil health.
Yes,
allowed the plants to thrive during the drought. And I mean, I shouldn't say thrive. You could tell that they were stressed, but other people were losing their crops. It's wild.
Yes, because the fungus itself stores water, and it connects to the plant, and it actually stores water for the plant to have it when times of drought come. So those plants that have the fungal networks attached and really thriving will be able to survive a drought, whereas the field next to it that had, been plowed 3 or 4 times a year and had no fungal network going on to speak of, they don't have anything to feed them during times of drought. They just dry up and die. It's very sad. When you see the side-by-side differences when people have done tests, it's absolutely astonishing. It's where they must be watering that other side. But it's not. It's merely the fungus giving back the excess water it has stored during the times when there was plenty of water. Because that's the other thing fungus does, is when you have plenty of water, it doesn't just let it run through the soil, it holds it.
So
and holds it like a sponge.
That's critically important. I mean, just another reason why understanding these practices, buying regenerative organic, buying certified organic, these things do matter, obviously, because of all the things we've already discussed, like the pesticides and the fertilizers and all, but even down to drought and the planet's ability
and
to
flooding.
Flooding and drought, and the planet's ability to withstand these events, and the human food supply chain's ability to withstand these events. It's very important to understand, not just as a farmer, but as a consumer as well.
And with the mulching that goes along with the composting, because it is also used as a mulch on the top, the cooling of the root zone and the feeding of the root zone that way is also another thing that, because as the temperatures get, unfortunately, seem to be getting hotter every year.
Yeah, threatening the coffee farms big time.
To try harder to keep our soil, at least the root zone, cooler, because the root zone is really the place where the plant is most concerned about its temperature, and that's why plants do so much better in the ground rather than in a pot in normal circumstancing, assuming all other things were equal, because of the temperature. It's regulated its temperature. So, underground houses, how they're always 50 something degrees or whatever. And they have that of kind of maintaining a temperature that works for the plant
The
roots and keeps them
insulation, yeah.
comfortable. Yeah,
Unlike
yeah,
anything else when it's in the ground. That's exactly right. This
correct.
has already
And the
been such an
mulch will
enlightening
do
episode.
that.
This is like, this is, I
Well, the
really,
mulch will do that, and you're making the compost as your mulch, and so you're feeding the soil as you're cooling the soil. It's a really good way to keep the nutrient cycle going, and to help regulate your temperature at the same time. You're keeping your plant a little healthier. Yeah.
these collective episodes have to be the most definitive argument for why we should be doing these practices, because you've just laid out
Yeah.
so many different things and stuff that I mean, I've already studied this stuff for hours and hours. I've talked to people,
Yeah.
and you're still surprising me. I do want to kind of start with the basics, though, not just for the
Sure.
audience, but for me, because composting is something that I really want to understand and engage in more than I have been, and I want to understand it deeper because it's very rudimentary what I actually know. But I've seen it in action, so it's definitely piqued
Correct.
my interest.
And you can do it at various scales. You can do basically kitchen waste kind of scale, or you can do your nice backyard scale, or you can do major big farming scale.
Perfect.
But the process is kind of the same, but there's little small things that'll be different. Like your kitchen waste composting, you want to start with the bokashi method, because in your kitchen waste you're going to be wanting to throw away kind of things that aren't really recommended for your backyard.
Even the
leaf
meats and
pile.
stuff like that. That's right. Let's get into that. Let's start with the basics and then get into that. You got to bring up that bokashi method because that interests me as well.
Yeah.
But for the very, very first time listeners, what I would love for you to kind of explain the composting process. Like, what is it about this decomposition? It is a decomposition process, right? What does it do to the soil system? Just give us an overview.
Well, what you're trying to achieve is you want to have a thriving colony of bacteria and fungi and other little microorganisms that live in the soil, the various little creatures that live in the soil, the little spiders, the microarthropods, the, earthworms, nematodes, etc. They're all part of that system. They all help to break down these materials and make them into plant available material, which is similar to what you're getting out of like a KNF system. But in a KNF system, you're kind of extracting them via sugar and alcohol.
The Korean
whereas
natural
in this
farming,
system, right? You're getting your microbe colonies that. Whereas in a compost system, you're just kind of letting these bacteria and fungi and etc. eat and degrade the ingredients that you put in. That would be your leaf matter, your plant matter, the things that you're trying to decompose.
Your waste, right?
And they would be releasing the nutrients without a fermentation process. It's more of just a decomposition process. But the principle is the same, and the end result is the same, is that you're releasing these nutrients eventually to get them to the plant available form. Right. And in a composting system, what is really super beneficial about it is that you are using the nutrients that are already in the plants. You could even use the plants, that you have been growing, and you will recycle the same nutrients that you've already given them, because most of that is stored in their leaves, some of it in the stems and things, but all of that nutrient will be returned to the plant again after the composting process. And you don't have to add any additional fertilizers that way, so long as your composting process was complete.
So you're cutting down on waste while creating your fertilizers. Yeah.
And you can do it as a cold compost process, which takes quite a bit longer, or a thermal hot composting process, which ideally will take about 3 weeks, but it depends on your carbon to nitrogen ratio. I've had piles that took me forever because I was having a hard time getting the balance correct. And but that's just a thing that you work on over the years. You notice if it isn't decomposing, you need more nitrogen-rich stuff. And if it is decomposing way too quickly and putrefying, then you want more carbon-rich things in there. And you just kind of work it out. But it's so hard to go by those carbon to nitrogen ratio charts, because you don't know when they harvested that stuff. Like leaves, for instance, if you take them when they're green and let them dry, they'll still have all the nutrients in them as when they were green, even though they're dry and brown. But if you take those same leaves and let them go through their life cycle and fall off the tree all on their own and turn brown that way, like when autumn comes, they've used up their nutrients. There's hardly any nutrient left at that point. So the time to collect leaves is when your plants have life. So you might not want to be doing it off the plant that you're getting production off of. You might want to have a crop that is just grown for compost that you can harvest while it's green.
That's what these coffee systems were like. They had all these
Yeah.
varieties of plants and fruit trees, and they were able to use the waste from local banana peels, all of that stuff gets used. But then also what you said, the biggest thing that amazed me about the Colombian regenerative organic farms, the large scale farms that I saw, was that they were reusing their own coffee waste. The coffee cherry meat, it goes bad really, really fast, but I guess it also composts very easily.
Probably high nitrogen. It's probably a fantastic source.
That's what I was going to ask. If you're just using, like, how is that sustainable? If it's a high nitrogen waste product and you brew it into a compost tea, or you compost it into nitrogen and then you apply it to your next plant, will that just go indefinitely? Like, I figure eventually you would run out of nitrogen.
Well, not really, because in a system that's really got the proper biology going on. For instance, where earthworms come into the picture, you usually just have to be not plowing anymore, and earthworms will come, particularly if you have a lot of carbon available, because they don't actually eat like the leaves and the cardboard. They just chew it up. What they're looking for is the bacteria that's all over it. In order to get that bacteria off, they just happen to have to chew the crap out of this stuff. And so they break it down that way.
Whoa.
But they're really looking for the bacteria on it to eat. But everywhere they go, they're creating more nutrient than was in the soil before. They have a way of amplifying nutrient quantities. So,
that's incredible.
In places where they do no till and no fertilizing, they'll have a soil test before they plant, and they'll say X amount of nitrogen in the soil. And then they'll do tissue samples out of the leaves later and find much higher amounts than what was in the soil. So they, the only way you can figure it out is that the biology is taking care of the business. And it's very surprising. It's very exciting when you see the results of people who, and when they've really gone all the way and made the commitment, and they do no longer plow and they do no longer feed. They just let their crop residue decompose within biology that's already in the soil. That's the easiest way. If you have a giant, kind of system where you have multiple acres, you just want to let your crop residues decompose on top of the soil. As it mulches, it's also composting, and it's feeding those microbes, and then the earthworm colonies get thicker and thicker, and the beneficial biology and the fungus colonies, they get thicker and thicker.
That's a natural earth state that you're describing.
Yeah.
So that's really what composting points towards. I mean, we're going to get into Korean natural farming on different episodes, like kind of a totally different school of thought, equally valid, equally useful in different applications. But what you're describing,
it's a different way of getting kind of to the same place. You're recycling nutrients from the plants, and you're getting the nutrients back out of the plants and putting them into the soil.
But it's kind of like the fermenting is kind of I don't want to say artificial, but it's kind of like an intervention process. Whereas composting, I feel, is really, really close to what happens if humans weren't around. It's decomposing.
Well, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you go to the bottom of the forest stuff, you'll notice how nice that material really is. It just looks heavenly. You really want to just get your hands in it. You really want to smell it. When it's in that state where you can no longer recognize what that plant matter was. And it's just wonderful
rich
material.
Soil. That's incredible. Yeah. That's what we're missing. And that's what we kind of destroyed with the new systems. But I think we learned a lot, and I think it's been beneficial in a lot of ways. But let's get back to this regenerative agriculture, this compost microbe-based farming, because I've seen it in action, and it's great.
You want to try to achieve a balance in your materials that you're combining to be like a 30 nitrogen to 1 carbon. You want that kind of a ratio. But I said, you can't always trust those charts, because you don't know when the stuff was harvested that they tested to make that determination with a lot of those things. So you kind of have to experiment and see what's working for you. But you don't need nearly as much nitrogen-rich things as you need carbon. But it's usually, they say, suppose you had 10 buckets, and that was going to be your whole pile. So 6 of those buckets would be full of your carbon-rich things, and 3 of those buckets would be full of
nitrogen-rich things.
Nitrogen things.
Okay.
And 1 of those buckets would be very high nitrogen. things,
Oh, okay.
like a blood meal or something, alfalfa meal, something that's a very high nitrogen thing
Right.
that you would use to make what you would hope would be your perfect balance. But there's some plants that all by themselves have a really beautiful 30-1. So if you grow
Wow.
a field of peas, for instance, legumes are famous for having this
Right.
perfect carbon to nitrogen.
That's
If you grow a
crazy.
field of those to use just as your compost material, then you don't have to stress about, do I have too much grass or not enough sticks, or what am I doing wrong? You just grow the peas and
God, that's
all of
fascinating.
that material for your compost. Hopefully you harvest the peas too, because peas are so good right off the vine. Oh my gosh.
But it goes back to that. It was the same thing in the coffee farms. They had, it
Yes.
doesn't take a ton of revamping, but they had
No.
a chicken pen. They had their own chickens there on the coffee farm. I'm sure that they were using the chicken manure. Like you add a couple things here or there. They had some fruit trees interspersed, which
Yes.
I also believe in the coffee industry, you need those to achieve rainforest friendly certification, which is a
Yeah.
really cool
Yeah.
certification because it
Exactly.
goes right
You
along with
don't want to
shade
have a
grown.
monocrop, because if you have a monocrop, you're going to have just, a total disaster when a pest problem comes. You won't have any of the things that are, the other creatures around that were going to help save you.
That's right. That's what it was because of the rainforest
Yeah.
certification that Francisco put up at Sorry, give me a second. La Finca Primavera, his farm. Took me a second, but I
Yeah.
got there. Because of the banana trees and other trees that he
Yeah.
interspersed,
Yes.
birds were returning that they hadn't seen in the region in
Yes.
years,
Yes.
and they were starting
It's
to.
so important.
It's crazy, man. It's like it's
And these
really it's
animals,
fascinating.
they bring their manure with them. So yeah, they might bring a couple pests, but they are also giving you something in return for what they're taking from your crop
Totally.
or whatever. They are leaving manure around. They are helping to keep the biology fertile and to keep the cycle going.
And it just shows
That's
that
part of it too.
we're learning more and more about this. The more we learn, the more processes we discover. When did we even discover the soil food web in its totality and microbes and how they work? A field that we're still learning about.
Well, yeah, they barely scratched the surface of it, and they kind of poo-poo it because they're so hypnotized by chemical salesmen. But I know that when my mentor, favorite guru lady, Elaine Ingham, when she was first studying it in college, it was not really very much known about it, and it was her field of expertise.
Just
So
a
she
couple
really
decades ago.
got a lot of research done. Yeah. So, it's like they kind of knew things were in the soil, but they kind of figured they're just sort of incidental. They aren't really doing anything except just that that's where they happen to live. Like you don't really need them. You can have in their mind, you could have a completely sterile soil and they can just artificially feed it. And yeah, you can, but in the end, you can see how that backfires, especially out in the real world, on the real earth, where all those toxins eventually go in the wrong places and do the wrong things.
Right.
And
it's just a
yeah.
fascinating field, and I'm excited to learn
Oh
more.
yeah.
And it's especially intriguing because, it's like Dr. Coffee always says, this is stuff they wrote about in the Old Testament. But now we're
Yes.
just now learning about it in the late 1900s. That's when we're learning the names of these organisms. That's when we're learning which ones trade for nitrogen,
Right.
for sugar, and which one, whatever it may be. We've written about this for so long, but just now
Yeah.
taking the time to learn it. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
fascinating.
Well, leaf mold, that was one of the earliest things that people noticed, what they called leaf mold, just your disintegrating leaves, how much better things grew when they had that kind of decomposed matter, that organic matter on their soil.
They would just see it in action.
And
That's right.
yeah, they'd start to notice and think, oh, that the plants seemed to like that. They didn't really know why so much as they just seemed to like it. So
That's cool, though, man.
those practices were going on up to the time when the synthetics were introduced, and they have very good marketing for those synthetics, and especially at a time when people were very vulnerable to a good salesman.
Right.
Science-based stuff, and this was the space age, and everybody, seduced by rockets and science, and things were just very intoxicating in those days.
Yeah, and the bumper crop and everything was
up.
bigger and faster, but it turns out that years down the road, you shoot yourself in the foot, and that's now what we're learning. But again, maybe that inspired some of this push for the discovery that we're now doing here in this podcast here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's a little bit like it's all part of a process, I think. And I just love to be part of it. I do want to bring it back though, because we have a limited amount of time, and I want to talk about the application of compost, specifically one way that I was surprised to see on a large scale farm, compost teas. This is something that you've told me about that you do in your garden, but like you said, I guess it works on a large scale. This is what?
They get gallons and hundreds of gallons at a time that they'll brew. And then they'll just take their big sprayer equipment, their hundreds of gallon tanks in the big trucks, and they'll just go spray it out.
That's so cool.
And sometimes they'll spray it out like in a helicopter, like the way that we used to do crop dusting. They'll spray it out onto the soil that way, and they'll find amazing things. In fact, they have found on some potato crops and things in Idaho on a large scale farm that even, dropping the stuff from the airplane in the sky, even in the sunny parts of, where they say don't spray anything, the microbes will die in the sun. They weren't dead in the sun. They were just the same as they were in the others. They were covering the surfaces of the leaves, and everything was growing good. Whoa. So they had they had the proof there that you don't even have to worry about that. If you have droplets in your compost tea that are, I think a micron thick, just a drop. You don't need a huge thickness of droplets in your water. I think it's just a micron, but that's all you need to protect your microbes from UV rays that would kill them. So
whoa, that's wild.
The water itself is thick enough to protect them. If you're doing a really fine mist, that might be a trouble. But if you're doing actual droplets, you're going to protect your microbes just by the size of your droplets.
So are you losing anything by taking your compost and you say you brew it, you kind of bubble it into water and you make it tea? Is it the exact same thing as putting it back in the earth? Is it more accessible? What's up with that?
Well, what's happening in the tea is that you're multiplying these microbes artificially more quickly than they would multiply on their own in the soil, because you want to take your little bit of tea, and it's like making your concentrates of anything. You're going to get as much as you can in this small concentrate of tea, and then you're going to put it into a big thing of water, so that dilutes it out, so you can spread it over far and wide.
That's so cool.
So, for instance, depending on the quality of your compost tea, you can actually spread it quite thin and do still a huge benefit from it. If you have a lesser quality, in other words, fewer organisms and such inside your tea or your compost, it'll still be good. You just have to apply more of it, per square foot and that way you will still get the biology in there. Yeah, exactly.
I'm convinced that the compost tea is what makes the coffee taste good. I'm convinced that the microbiology and that stimulation. Yeah. I also appreciate what you said on this show, which is decaying things bring flavor from your blue cheeses to your kimchi. I thought that was interesting. But really, I'm convinced, I'm sure it has to do with the organic inputs that they're using and the chicken manure right from the farm and all that. But when I taste a bland, non-organic coffee, and then I taste these ones that have been, compost tea's been applied to them, I really think these microorganisms are what bring out the flavor. And I don't want to state that as fact, but that's really what I'm starting to think.
I wouldn't doubt it at all. And these microorganisms are going to be present in all those decaying things that we're talking about,
right?
Because even as at the smallest level, they're taking those things into their bodies and storing them. So that's the other beauty of compost and compost tea systems, is when the microbes, the organisms are holding all these nutrients in their body, you don't lose any to run off in the soil. It doesn't go off into the creeks and etc., because it really is held in the body. They do take it up and hold it in the body. And when these water hits the soil, these little microbes are so sticky, and their whole life is sticking themselves to things and sticking things to each other. And they just stick right away to the soil, and the microbes don't wash through the soil. They're really good at sticking to it. Their life depends on it. That's their thing, you know. And so you're not losing a bunch of bacteria out of your runoff. If you do, the bacteria's got the nutrient in its body. It's not just a free soluble form. You have to kill that bacteria to release that nutrient, or wait for it to crap.
So compost tea is especially interesting because it's not just a microbial inoculant. It carries with it a whole host of nutrient profiles depending on what was composted.
Correct.
it is the big replacer, as far as I can tell, in these big ag setups for your bottled synthetic nutrients, which, as we've discussed, are chelated to salts, and they dry out the soil and they destroy the microbiology, they destroy the fungal life. So I don't know. I feel like this is the missing ingredient.
Elaine Ingham also said that if you have these salty nutrients or whatever, and you just want to use them up and get rid of them, or you just think that you want to make sure that your biology has X, Y, or Z in it, you can still apply those to your compost pile at a rate of 1/10, that is 1/10.
Wow.
At that rate to the compost pile that you would have applied, them, whatever the recommendation was going to be, 1/10 of the amount, and then apply that to 100 pounds of compost. Okay. And you take that 100 pounds of compost and you can apply that over 1 acre of soil. And that way, that if you wait for 2 weeks after you've applied that 1/10 of the amount that you would have normally put in, then that gives the biology a chance to take it all up and they hold it.
Huh.
If you put it out before that, then you're still going to have free soluble salts in there.
Wow.
But if you can give it the 2 weeks that it needs in a compost pile to take it up, that's fine. And you can do the same thing in your compost tea, but you will put in a whole lot, even less than that. But if you give it a few hours before you're going to apply your compost tea, and you want to add a little bit of your whatever, or either organic fertilizer liquid or powder, or something that's somewhat soluble or that can go through your watering system. But if you give it a few hours in the compost tea brewer, then it'll have a chance for the microbes to take that up. But in the pile, it takes a little longer. Like I say, in the tea, everything's going artificially fast because the pumped up oxygen and moisture and the extra food that you just gave them, and it's party time in there.
Right, that makes a lot of sense.
Time, yeah.
It's really really cool, and I love getting this information out there. I want to squeeze in a few questions before we wrap it up. I see the decomposition, as part of the soil food web and all of this very natural, beneficial process. But then I also see that plants can get diseases. Plants can get bad bacteria and pathogens.
Oh, yeah.
What separates, what we would consider like a rotting, bad, infective type of bacteria versus what seems to be very, very beneficial bacteria from decomposition?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, all soils are not all alike because of a couple of things: the parent material, the environmental stresses, things like that. Some soils are, if a soil is a very new volcanic soil, it's not going to grow anything because it's just rock. But as time goes by and it gets weathered and there's dust and things decaying begin to fall on it, then it becomes something that you can grow on. But, a lot of soils are really not that old as far as geological time is concerned. And so they just don't have the same diversity in their soil that an older soil does. Like in the old growth forest, you really have such a fungal dominance that you don't have any weeds and you don't have a lot of soil pests because the fungal network is so intense. The bad guys can't get to the roots, and nobody has to go in there and tend to that forest. It lives, hundreds and hundreds of years without our help. But, there's soils around where I live are extremely thin. They're really pretty young. The volcanoes that began the earth over here were still going off not all that long ago. Geologically speaking, our soil is fairly young. Like if you go by the sides of the cliffs, you see the cutoff of the soil profile. You can see that the top layer where the organic matter is so thin. And the profile is a very poor, not biologically rich soil. So some soils just have more going on. The porosity makes a difference. Some soils are just baked so hard and they've been so barren because of whatever. There wasn't enough organic matter. Things get blown away. No organic matter was able to pile up. We already have very sheer cliffs. It takes just forever on some of these mountain slopes because they're so steep to build up layers of soil.
So you need microbiology. You need probably the right type of microbiology and the right amount. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And in nature, it just takes so long. That's the thing. As humans, they're so impatient. So we make compost and composting because we really want to speed this process up.
I see.
I don't have a few more centuries to wait for the soil to get better. I've got to do this now. So I've noticed over the years here, the more that we apply, the nicer and softer the soil gets. And a lot of that is just simple things like the mulching, just adding extra straw, chopped straw, wood chips, things like that, and as letting them decompose and just not tilling anything. And you get better and better fungus every year. We find more and more mushrooms, so we know the fungal colonies are improving all the time, and it's always exciting.
But I guess the moral of that story is that not all soils are created equal. They're vastly different, and this is a good way to tie back to the types of fungus and microorganisms are vastly different. You mentioned bokashi.
Correct.
Bokashi has a unique ability to break down meats. Like I understand that adding like meats and unprocessed, unground bones is often a really bad idea to your soil because they don't break down right. But bokashi is a certain type of fungus that you're able to break down meats.
It's very aggressive, and you know it kind of doesn't break it down to an unrecognizable thing, but it breaks it down to a thing that you can throw into your regular compost pile, and then it will decompose into an unrecognizable thing once that gets. So with the kitchen bokashi waste thing, you kind of have to go through the kitchen part of the composting and then take that and put it out into another pile to get it to really break down. Otherwise, what you're going to be looking at is still going to kind of look like just a sort of a dried up bit of
meat
food or something.
Right.
Yeah, banana peel or whatever.
But this will allow you to add meat waste to your compost regimen.
And it will. And it'll get it to a state where it is now biologically ready for the rest of the decomposition process.
Okay, bokashi kitchen compost bin. Looks like there's a bunch on Amazon. Some good reviews. Bokashi starter kit for the bin. Oh, this is really cool. So you can take all of your waste and you begin composting it in your kitchen. The bokashi can break down, as we said, stuff that your normal compost pile can't, and then you add it to your compost pile in the backyard or your compost bin. I've been looking into getting one of those bins that you can turn over with a handle. Do you recommend those or no?
Yeah. I have one that I use at work, and I started using it a little bit more this year than I had in previous years because we moved our nursery from the place where I had a great big pile to a place where I didn't really have a place set up for a pile. So I started using the rotating barrel thing, and I got some compost out of it. And I had used it a few times before, and I got some compost out of it then also. So you just have to be patient, keep checking the moisture. You want to make sure that it's, you opening it up and putting in extra water when you need to. You don't want to get real dry, and keep churning it. And after a while, you start to notice you're not recognizing the bits of brown as being a leaf or a stem or something. And you start to notice after a while, hey, I don't recognize any plant parts in here anymore. And then if you're not sure about how much it has heated up, so you may not have killed off all of the potential pathogens or the potential weed seeds that could be in there, because they won't necessarily get as hot as like a 4x4 compost pile. So it will make a good compost, but it might still have some pathogens, and it might still have some weed seeds. But it would still also have a lot of nutrients and a lot of good biology in it. It just, you could still find yourself occasionally pulling up a weed.
Man, this is incredible. Okay. I'm all about this bokashi bin. You can compost pet feces, apparently.
Yeah.
Did you know
all
this?
All that nasty stuff. All the nasty stuff. There's a method that I was taught that was like 1, 2, 3. It's like 2 inches deep. You start with your layer of bokashi. Then you put your 2 inches of kitchen scrap or your what have you. And then you put 2 inches of shredded newspaper, or you could use maybe some kind of sawdust thing, but I would use shredded newspaper was what I was taught. And then you just keep layering it that way until your container gets filled up. And then when that thing is composted, it usually takes a couple of weeks or whatever to go through its process, maybe 2-3 weeks. And then you take that and you put that into your regular compost pile, and then it becomes completely broken down. And optimized, shall we say. Now, some people will take it just from the kitchen waste part and use it out that way, but to me, it's not really done yet.
I
I
see.
was
Yeah, it looks like
recommended
that's
to
what these guys want you to
put it
do.
through.
But yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like you like to go through that extra step.
Yeah.
But interesting stuff. I'm gonna look into this, man. This is so cool to me. I'm adding things one at a time, really slow to my home garden. Whatever I can do, save my eggshells, trying to use that for calcium.
Yeah. And well, that's also good. That's also good in all your bokashi compost pile,
Nice. Good point.
eggshells and things. You're getting all that extra fungus really going in the compost pile when you get that out in there. It's one of the best things for speeding up that compost pile. Bokashi's always been recommended for helping that whole pile to decompose. So
I think coffee grounds are the easiest addition, and because they're just right there, you toss them in the soil. And I can't recommend that one enough.
Yeah, I think it's one of those underrated things that people forget. You shouldn't just be throwing them away. What a waste.
No. Exactly.
I like to put them all kinds of plants.
Before we wrap it up, though, listen, one more question I have to ask. I'm in the Midwest. How does composting do in the cold?
You don't get nearly the activity in the cold.
I mean, is it just basically not even worth doing in these freezing winter months?
Well, if you can brew it in the environment where you're going to be applying it, where the temperatures are the same, so then you will be able to do that.
But an outdoor bin, not so good.
Yeah. And, if you're in a freezing outdoor thing, you probably don't have any plants that are going to really want to be drinking it much anyway.
Oh, good point.
And so
I guess I was just thinking from a waste perspective, and what that would mean for winter is just sits there in the winter, and then we get back at it in summer.
Yeah, the compost piles, they usually recommend that over winters that you, and during the summer, that you cover your piles, because you want to maintain a certain amount of moisture. You don't want them to get overwatered or underwatered. So you kind of really do want to maintain a 50% moisture thing in there too. You want to be able to kind of reach into the middle and pick it up. And if you squeezed it really as tight as you could, you might barely get just a little bit of water between your fingers, sort of oozing out, but not really anything dripping. That would be ideally 50% moisture.
Yeah, because it'll dry out when it freezes out here. Yeah. Everything gets freeze-dried.
Yeah. And then you start back over the springtime. And if you think your pile has gone bad for whatever reason, the recommendation is that you just spread that out, let it sun solarize for, a week or two, and then you go ahead and put it together as a compost. Put it back. Start over.
I think this spring is going to be the spring of compost. So stay tuned, listeners. I'll update you on that.
Hey.
As
if
always.
You have a place for it, it really doesn't take too much if you just dedicate. If you've got 3x3 is an ideal space for a pile. Yeah. And if you're lucky, a lot of people do this bin. They kind of either do bins or they use pallets to make the bin.
That's what I'm going to do.
You want air circulation.
I'm a little cramped here, so I don't know how my neighbors would feel about pie. Once I get my own place, it's game on. It's going to be the wife's going to hate it. It's going to be nothing but compost piles and hugelkultur beds in the backyard. But until then, I have to keep it kind of clean and aesthetic. So I think this spring is going to be the spring of compost.
Yeah. That barrel, that's a good start.
That's what I'm going to do. That's going to be my start. I'm going to get my toes wet.
Yeah. Pay attention to the moisture content. That's all. Keep it rotated and moist, and you'll be fine.
Absolutely. And listeners, I'll keep you updated as always. My coffee tree seed is in the dirt. Did you receive your coffee tree?
I got mine. Yes, I was about to plant that. I have lots of pots, and I'm going to put that in here, and it's going to sit in a sunny spot where I have also my brain just went dead. A lemon tree, Meyer lemon, that I bring in for the winter.
Cool.
If nothing else, I'll get some yummy smelling flowers off of it, and I actually usually do get a few bits of fruit. But where I'm at. Cool. It snows up here in the winter, so that tree comes inside. It never gets to get very big, but It's really nice to have those homegrown lemons even out here in the hay fork.
Oh, I love it. And everyone who's listening, we're gearing up for the second round of coffee tree seed kits. So if you've sent in your information, we're just waiting until we have enough applicants and we'll send out another round. I'll keep you updated on this show. Stay subscribed. And that's all for today on the CHSP. This is Jordan River and Marybeth Sanchez signing off, wishing you an extraordinary day, and we'll see you next time on the Coffee, Health, and Science Podcast.